Poor mother buys a single balloon for her daughter's birthday with 3, but a young billionaire sees everything and does the unthinkable. The afternoon wind pushed the clouds slowly across the sky. In the city center, where the noise of cars mixed with the voices of street vendors, Elena held her daughter's hand tightly. Maya walked beside her, her bright eyes shining with expectation. It was her birthday. 4 years old. Elena squeezed the small hand between her fingers and felt the weight of the envelope in her pants pocket. $3. It was all that was left after paying the rent, the electricity, and buying food for the week. $3 miserable. She looked down and met Maya's little blonde face turned upwards, waiting. The girl didn't say anything, but Elena knew. She knew she was hoping for something. Anything. A sign that this day was different from the others. "Mommy, are we going to buy something?" Maya asked in her thin, innocent voice. Elena swallowed hard. "Yes, we are, sweetie. We're going to pick something very pretty for you." They stopped in front of a colorful stall on the sidewalk. Balloons of all sizes swayed, tied to wires as if they were dancing with the wind. There was a red balloon, a blue one, a yellow one, a pink one with little stars, and others with drawings of little animals. There were 10 in total, each one more colorful than the last. Maya let go of her mother's hand and ran to the stall, her eyes wide. "Look, Mommy! Look how many!" The vendor, a middle-aged man with a faded cap, smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. "Which one do you want, little one?" he asked. Maya looked all around, undecided. She wanted all of them. But something inside her, even at such a young age, already knew she couldn't ask for much. Elena approached, feeling her chest tighten. "How much is one balloon?" she asked quietly. $2.50, the vendor replied. $2.50. 50 cents would be left. Maybe enough to buy a small loaf of bread tomorrow morning. "I will take one," Elena said, trying to smile. Maya looked at her mother, then at the balloons, and back at her mother again. "Mommy!" Her voice came out in a whisper, almost ashamed. "Just one balloon for my birthday." That cut Elena in half. She knelt in front of her daughter, held her thin little shoulders, and looked right into her bright eyes. "Darcy, we don't have enough money, sweetie, but we're going to choose the most beautiful one. The most special of all, the one that only you deserve." Maya bit her lower lip and nodded. She didn't cry, she didn't complain. She just accepted, the way children do when they learn too early that life is hard. She pointed to the pink balloon with silver stars. That one," Elena paid. The vendor handed over the balloon, and Maya held the string with both hands as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and maybe it was. They were about to leave when a man's voice sounded behind them. "Excuse me." Elena turned. A tall man, in simple but well-kept clothes, was standing a few steps away. He had dark hair, a serious face, but his eyes had something different, something tired, but attentive. "Yes," Elena replied, automatically protective. The man looked at Maya, then at Elena, and then at the vendor. "How much to take all the balloons?" The vendor blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "All of them. The 10 you have there." The vendor looked at the balloons and answered, $25. The man took his wallet out of his pocket, counted the bills, and handed them to the vendor without hesitation. "You can untie them all." Elena stood there, not understanding. Maya clutched the string of the pink balloon, her eyes wide. The vendor began to release the balloons from the wires, tying them all together with a single string. It was a strange, almost comical scene. A bouquet of 10 colorful balloons floating in the middle of the sidewalk. The man took the string, turned, and walked over to Maya. He knelt, getting down to her level, and held out the balloons. "May your birthday be a happy one, little one." Maya looked at the balloons, then at her mother, and back at the balloons again. She didn't know if she could take them. She didn't know if this was real. Elena felt her throat tighten. "Sir, I can't accept this." The man lifted his eyes to her. There was no pity in his gaze. There was something softer, something that looked like respect. "It's not for you, it's for her," he said, still holding the balloons towards Maya. "Every child deserves to have a happy birthday." Maya looked at her mother, silently asking for permission. Eleanor, with teary eyes, nodded yes. The girl let go of the single pink balloon and grabbed the string with both hands. The balloons rose above her head, swaying in the wind, coloring the grey afternoon sky. Maya smiled, a huge smile, the kind that shows all your little teeth. "Thank you, mister," she said, jumping with joy. The man smiled back. It was a discreet but sincere smile. Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm Elena," she said, still emotional. "And this is Maya." The man held out his hand, Julian. Eleanor shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip. It was the hand of someone who worked, but also of someone who had comfort. She didn't know how she knew that, but she knew. "Thank you, Julian," she said, her voice choked up. "Really." "Thank you so much." Julian nodded, seeming a little awkward with her gratitude. He was about to leave when Maya, without a second thought, grabbed the sleeve of his shirt. "Julian." He stopped and looked down. Hearing his name in that little child's voice did something strange to his chest. Maya tilted her head to the side, curious. "Do you want to have some cake with us?" Silence. Elena's eyes widened. "Maya, sweetie, you can't—" But Julian gently raised his hand, interrupting her. "Is there cake?" he asked Maya. "There is," she replied excitedly. "Mommy made chocolate cakes. It's a little one, but it's yummy." Julian looked at Elena. She was blushing, embarrassed, not knowing what to say. "I don't want to intrude," he said quietly. Eleanor took a deep breath. This man had just given her daughter something she couldn't. The least she could do was offer a piece of cake. "It's no trouble," she answered, her voice still trembling. "If you'd really like to, we live close by." Julian hesitated. He seemed to be thinking. But then he looked again at Maya, who was holding the balloons with a huge smile on her face, and something inside him gave way. "All right, I'll come." Maya celebrated as if she had won the lottery. They walked through the streets together. Elena in front, Maya in the middle holding the balloons, and Julian behind, in silence. People stared at the strange group, but no one said anything. After 10 minutes, they arrived at an old building with peeling paint and creaky stairs. Eleanor went up first, opening the door to a small apartment on the second floor. The place was simple, a living room with a worn-out sofa, a coffee table, and a frayed curtain. The kitchen was attached to the living room, separated only by a low counter. There was a narrow hallway that led to 2 tiny bedrooms and a bathroom, but it was clean, tidy. It smelled of soap and chocolate. Maya ran inside and stopped in the middle of the living room, holding the balloons with both hands. "We need to have a party," she announced excitedly. Elena smiled, still not believing what was happening. "Let Mommy help you, sweetie." Together, they started spreading the balloons around the living room. Maya chose the spots and Elena tied them, a blue balloon on the chair, 2 red ones on the doorknob, the yellow one hanging from the curtain, the green one on the ceiling lamp, the purple one on the back of the sofa. Julian stood by the door watching. He didn't know if he should help or just let them do it their way. "Julian, can you hold this one?" Maya held out an orange balloon to him. He took it, almost carefully, as if the balloon would break. "Where do you want me to put it?" Maya looked around thoughtfully. "Say over there, near the cake table." He went over and tied the balloon to one of the table legs. Maya clapped her hands, satisfied. In a few minutes, the room was transformed. The colorful balloons filled every corner, swaying gently in the breeze coming through the slightly open window. It looked like a different house. It looked like a real party. Maya stood in the middle of the room, spinning slowly, admiring it all. "Look how pretty my party is with the balloons you gave me," she said, her eyes shining as she looked at Julian. Julian looked at the scene, at the little blonde girl with bright eyes in the middle of the balloons, at the huge smile, at the genuine joy. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of belonging. Elena went to the kitchen and came back with the cake in her hands. It was small, covered with homemade chocolate frosting. It had some colorful sprinkles on top, almost like confetti, and 4 little candles stuck in the middle. Simple, but made with love. She placed the cake on the coffee table in the living room. and picked up the box of matches. "Come here, sweetie. Let's sing happy birthday." Maya ran to the cake, standing in front of it. Elena lit the candles, one by one, and looked at Julian. "Will you sing with us?" He nodded. "Yes." Elena started, her voice soft and emotional. "Happy birthday to you." Julian joined in, his deep voice hesitant at first, but soon loosening up. "Happy birthday to you." Maya was smiling so much she could barely stand still. "Happy birthday, dear Maya." Their voices blended, filling the small apartment with something priceless. "Happy birthday to you," Elena clapped. Julian clapped too. Maya laughed. "Happy. Now make a wish, sweetie," Elena said, her eyes welling up. Maya clasped her hands together, closed her eyes tightly, and stayed like that for a few seconds. Her little face was concentrated, as if she were making the most important wish in the world. Then she opened her eyes and blew out the candles all at once. They all went out. Eleanor and Julian applauded again. "Happy birthday, Maya," Eleanor said, hugging her daughter tightly. "Happy birthday," Julian repeated, his voice softer than before. Elena picked up the knife and started cutting the cake. She served a piece to Maya, another to Julian, and a smaller one for herself. She handed them the plates carefully. "I'm sorry if it's not perfect," she said, a bit embarrassed. "I made it with what I had at home." Julian picked up his fork, cut a piece just and brought it to his mouth. He chewed slowly, savoring it. Elena and Maya watched him, waiting for his reaction. He swallowed and looked at Elena, surprised. "This is really good." Elena blinked. "Really? Really good," he repeated, cutting another piece. "It's been a long time since I've had a homemade cake like this." Maya, with her mouth full of chocolate, nodded excitedly. "I told you Mommy makes the best chocolate cake in the world." Eleanor smiled, feeling her face grow warm. It was a simple compliment, but it meant a lot. It meant that this man, who had enough money to buy all the balloons at the stall, thought her cake was good. They ate in silence for a few moments. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was comfortable somehow. Maya swung her little legs on the chair, licking the frosting off her fingers. Elena ate slowly, still processing everything. And Julian, he just watched. He watched the simple home, now full of life, with the colorful balloons. He watched the mother who had done her best with almost nothing. He watched the happy child, even without a big party, without expensive gifts, without anything but a cake and balloons. And something inside him ached. It ached because he realized that this simplicity, this genuine joy, was exactly what he never had. It was what money couldn't buy. After eating, Elena stood up and started collecting the plates. Julian stood up too. "Let me help," he offered. "You don't have to, really. I insist." They went to the sink together. He held the plates while she washed. They worked in sync, without saying a word. After a few minutes, Elena broke the silence. "Thank you for making her day special," she said, her voice low. I couldn't have given that to her on my own." Julian shook his head. "You gave her what matters. You gave her love. The rest is just details." Elena felt her eyes fill with tears again, but she held them back. She wasn't going to cry in front of him. They finished washing, dried their hands, and went back to the living room. Maya was already on the sofa, yawning, tired from the day's excitement. Julian glanced at his watch and realized it was getting late. "I think I should go," he said. Elena nodded. "Thank you for coming. And for everything." "Thank you for the company," he replied. "It's been a long time since I've had such a nice afternoon." He walked to the door, but before leaving, he turned to Maya. "Happy birthday again, little one." Maya smiled, sleepy, but still managed to say, "Come back again, okay? Promise." Julian looked at Eleanor, as if asking for permission. She didn't say anything, but she didn't say no either. He looked back at Maya and nodded, "I promise." And he left, closing the door slowly behind him. Eleanor stood in the living room, looking at the balloons scattered around the apartment. Maya was already asleep on the sofa, hugging the pink balloon. She took a deep sigh. That had been the simplest birthday she could have imagined, but somehow it had also been the most special. and she couldn't explain why. But maybe she didn't need to. Sometimes, the good things in life happen without warning, and when they do, all you can do is accept them with gratitude. Eleanor picked Maya up, carried her to bed, covered her with the sheet, and kissed her on the forehead. "Happy birthday, my love," she whispered. Then she turned off the light and went to sleep too, with a heart lighter than it had been in a long time. 5 days had passed since Maya's birthday. Elena was in the kitchen preparing dinner. It was a simple meal: rice, beans, and a little chicken she had managed to buy on sale. Maya was sitting on the living room floor, playing with one of the balloons still left from the impromptu party. The little girl hummed softly, swaying the pink balloon from side to side. Eleanor smiled as she stirred the pot. For days, Maya hadn't stopped talking about Julian, about the balloons, about the cake, about how nice he had been to them. "Mommy, do you think Julian will come back?" Maya asked suddenly, still looking at the balloon. Elena stopped stirring the food for a second. "I don't know, sweetie. He probably has things to do, but he promised he would. He said he'd come back if we wanted him to," Elena corrected gently, "but sometimes people get busy." Maya pouted, but said nothing more. Elena went back to stirring the pot, but she felt something tighten in her chest. The truth was, she had also thought about Julian over the last few days. Thought about his calm demeanor, the way he had looked at Maya with genuine affection, the way he had helped wash the dishes without being asked. It was strange to miss someone she barely knew. There was a knock on the door. Elena frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her neighbor always called before coming over. "So I'll see who it is," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She walked to the door and opened it. Julian was standing on the other side, holding a brown paper bag. Elena's eyes widened. "Julian," he smiled, a bit shyly. "Hi, I hope I'm not bothering you." Before Eleanor could answer, Maya came running up behind her. "Julian!" The girl threw herself at his legs, hugging them tightly. Julian almost lost his balance but held the bag with one hand and placed the other on Maya's back. "Hi, little one," he said, laughing softly. Elena stood at the door, still processing his presence there. "I brought a few things," Julian explained, lifting the bag. "I thought you might like them." Maya was already trying to peek inside the bag, curious. "What's in there?" "Come in," Elena said, finally stepping away from the door. "We were just having dinner, but there's extra food if you want some." "No, thank you. I've already eaten. I just came for a quick visit." Julian came in and placed the bag on the coffee table. Maya was already beside him, jumping with anticipation. Can I see? Can I see?" "You can," Julian said, smiling. He started taking things out of the bag, one by one. First, a package of sweet bread. The smell instantly filled the room. "Sweet bread!" Maya cheered. Then, a small carton of orange juice. "Juice too!" And then Julian pulled out 3 children's books. They were new, with colorful covers and bright illustrations. One was about forest animals. Another was about a girl who wanted to be an astronaut. The third was a book of fairy tales. Maya took the books with wide eyes, as if she had just received a treasure. "Books, Mommy, look." "Real books." Elena approached, looking at the books and then at Julian. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know," Julian replied, looking at her. "But I wanted to." Elena didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to refuse out of pride, because she didn't like feeling like she was receiving charity. But the other part, the part that saw her radiant daughter holding those books, couldn't say no. "Thank you," she said, finally. Julian nodded. Maya was already sitting on the floor, opening one of the books. "Julian, will you read to me, please?" He looked at Elena as if asking for permission. She smiled and nodded. "Yes." Julian sat on the floor next to Maya. The girl snuggled up close to him, opening the book about the forest. "This one! I want this one!" Julian took the book and began to read. His voice was calm, measured, and he changed his tone slightly when he imitated the different animals in the story. Maya laughed, pointing at the drawings, asking questions. Elena stood in the kitchen doorway, just watching. There was something strange about that scene. A man she barely knew, sitting on her living room floor, reading to her daughter as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But at the same time, it felt right. She went back to the kitchen and finished preparing dinner, but she could still hear Julian's voice and Maya's laughter coming from the living room. When she returned, the two were still on the floor. Julian had already read 2 books and was starting the third. "It's time to eat, Maya," Elena said, carrying the plates. "A little more, Mommy. The story is so good." "We'll finish after dinner," Julian said, closing the book carefully. "Go on. Your mom made a delicious meal for you." Maya pouted but obeyed. Julian stood up, stretching his back. "Are you sure you don't want anything to eat?" Elena asked. "There's plenty of food." "No, thank you." "But can I have a piece of that sweet bread with you?" Elena smiled. "Of course." They sat at the table. Maya ate quickly, too excited about the new books to pay much attention to her food. Julian and Elena ate the sweet bread, talking quietly. "How was your day?" he asked. "Tiring," Elena replied with a shrug. "But normal, and yours?" "Quiet. Had a few meetings this morning. Nothing major." Maya interrupted, looking at Julian. "What do you do for work?" Julian smiled. "I work in business, boring adult stuff." "Oh," Maya made a face. "And that does sound boring." He laughed. "It is a little." After they ate, Julian helped Elena clear the plates. They went to the sink together, working in silence. He held the plates while she washed, just as he had done on her birthday. "You don't have to help every time you come over," Elena said, half joking. "I know. But my mother taught me never to leave the table without helping." Elena smiled. "Your mother raised you well." "She tried," Julian said, a touch of sadness in his voice. Elena noticed but didn't comment. If he wanted to talk about it, he would. They finished washing and went back to the living room. Maya was already on the sofa, waiting with the book in her hands. "Will you finish the story now?" she asked hopefully. Julian glanced at his watch. It was already past 8 o'clock. "Is it okay if I stay a little longer?" he asked Elena. "Stay," she replied. "Maya won't let you leave without finishing the story anyway." Julian laughed and sat on the sofa. Maya snuggled up next to him, and he continued reading from where he had left off. Elena sat in the chair opposite them, just watching the way Maya looked at him with admiration, watching the way he had patience, explaining the difficult words, answering all her questions. When the story ended, Maya yawned. "One more?" she asked, sleepy. "Tomorrow," Julian said, running a hand through the girl's blonde hair. "It's late. You need to sleep." "Will you come back tomorrow?" Maya asked, her bright eyes already heavy with sleep. Julian looked at Elena. She was quiet, but there was something in her gaze, something that wasn't rejection. He looked back at Maya. "Don, if you guys want me to, I'll come." "We want you to," Maya replied, trying to keep her eyes open. "Then I'll be back tomorrow." Maya smiled and stood up, swaying, still holding one of the books. "I'm taking this to bed, to dream about the story." Elena stood up too. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go brush your teeth." She took Maya to the bathroom. Julian stayed in the living room, looking around, looking at the balloons that were still there, a little deflated but still colorful, looking at the drawings on the fridge, looking at that small apartment that, somehow, felt more welcoming than his own house. Eleanor came back a few minutes later. "She's already asleep." "Didn't even wait for me to finish tucking her in." Julian smiled. "She's special." "She is," Elena agreed, sitting in the chair again. "She's everything to me." They were silent for a moment. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was just calm. "Thank you for the books," Eleanor said, "and for the bread. And for coming back. You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." She looked at him seriously. "You had no obligation to do this, to come back, to care." Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I came back because I wanted to, because—" He hesitated. "Because here I feel good. With you guys, things seem simpler. More real." Elena felt something tighten in her chest. "You can come back whenever you want," she said quietly. "The door is always open." Julian smiled. "Then I'll come back tomorrow. and the day after, and the day after that. If you'll let me. Eleanor smiled too. We'll let you. Julian stood up, glancing at his watch. I really need to go now. It's getting late. Eleanor walked him to the door. Good night, Julian. Good night, Eleanor. He left, and she stood at the door for a moment, watching him go down the stairs and disappear into the night. Then she closed the door slowly and looked at the living room, at the books on the table, at the leftover sweetbread, at the balloons swaying gently. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. And Julian came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Always bringing something small. Sometimes it was fresh fruit. Sometimes it was a simple toy. Sometimes it was just his presence. He played with Maya, read to her, taught her things, helped with her drawings, talked with Elena while she cooked. At first, Elena was tense, waiting for him to ask for something in return, waiting for him to get tired, waiting for him to disappear. But he didn't disappear. He kept coming back, and over time, his presence became part of their routine. Maya would wake up in the morning asking what time Julian would arrive. Helena would prepare extra tea just in case. The books were stacked on the coffee table, their pages already worn from being read so many times. As the weeks went by, Elena noticed small changes. Maya smiled more, talked more, drew more. She had started calling Julian by his name naturally and without shyness, and Elena started to realize she was waiting for him too. Waiting for the conversations at night, waiting for the laughter in the living room, waiting for that feeling that she wasn't alone. One night, after Julian had left and Maya was asleep, Elena sat on the sofa, looking at the scattered toys, the books on the table, the drawings stuck to the fridge. The house felt different now, more alive, fuller. And she realized something she was afraid to admit. Julian's presence was healing spaces that time had left empty, spaces she didn't even know existed, spaces she had learned to ignore because it hurt less than feeling the absence. But now, with him there, those spaces were being filled, slowly, without rushing, without pressure, just happening, and that scared her. But at the same time, for the first time in a long time, Eleanor allowed herself to feel something other than exhaustion and worry. She allowed herself to feel joy, and maybe, just maybe, she allowed herself to start trusting again. 2 weeks had passed since the night Elena had opened up to Julian about her life. Since then, something had changed between them. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing that could be put into words, but it was there. A greater intimacy, a deeper trust. Julian continued to show up almost every day, and every time he came, he stayed a little longer. Sometimes even after Maya was asleep, just talking with Elena in the living room, drinking tea, sharing comfortable silences. That particular night, Maya had fallen asleep earlier. The day at the neighbor's daycare had been long and the girl was exhausted. Eleanor put her to bed right after dinner. When she returned to the living room, Julian was standing by the window, looking down at the street below. He seemed lost in thought. Is everything okay? Eleanor asked, approaching. Julian turned his head and smiled, but it was a tired smile. I'm fine, just thinking. Elena sat on the sofa and gestured for him to sit too. Julian hesitated for a second, but then he sat next to her, not on the opposite sofa, as he used to do, but next to her. They were silent for a while. Elena waited. She had learned that Julian spoke when he was ready. Pushing him didn't work, and finally he spoke. You told me about your life, he began, his voice low, about how you're raising Maya alone, about everything you've been through. Eleanor nodded, listening. I think I owe you the same honesty. He took a deep breath as if preparing for something difficult. I grew up with money. A lot of money. My father had a big company. We lived in a huge house. I had everything a child could want, toys, clothes, trips. He paused, looking at his own hands. But my father, he wasn't around much. Always traveling, always in meetings, always too busy for me. Eleanor listened in silence, not interrupting. And my mother, His voice softened. My mother was different. She tried to make up for his absence. She gave me attention, she hugged me, she listened to me. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. She was the only person who really saw me, who really cared about me, not about the family money or what I could offer. She sounds like she was a special person, Elena said softly. She was. Very special. Julian was quiet for a moment before continuing. When I was 15, my father died. A heart attack. It was quick, and suddenly everything fell on my shoulders. The company, the business, everything. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exhaustion. My mother tried to help, but she didn't understand much about business, so I learned fast. I had to learn, and by the time I was 20, I was running everything myself. That must have been difficult, Eleanor commented. It was. But I managed. I kept the company running. Made it grow, actually. And I got rich. Very rich. He looked at Eleanor, and there was something in his eyes, something empty. But you know what's funny? The more money I made, the lonelier I felt. Elena said nothing, just held his gaze. People started getting close to me, Julian continued. Beautiful women, gorgeous even, well-dressed, perfumed, everything a man could want on the surface. He laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. But they didn't want me. They wanted the money. They wanted the expensive dinners. They wanted the jewelry. They wanted to be seen with me at events. Gold diggers, Elena said, and it wasn't a question. Exactly. Gold diggers. Superficial. Empty. Julian leaned back on the sofa, looking at the ceiling. I went out with several of them, tried to convince myself that one of them was different, but deep down, I knew. They were all the same. He turned his head to Elena, and I was left alone, surrounded by people but completely alone. Elena felt her chest tighten. She knew loneliness, but it was a different kind of loneliness from his. Hers was physical. His was emotional. "And your mother?" she asked. Julian's face clouded over a bit. "She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. She fought for 2 years, but it wasn't enough." He took a deep breath, and Eleanor saw his eyes get wet. "When she died, there was a void that no one filled, no one at all. I had everything, a big house, cars, money, but I had no one who truly cared about me." He quickly wiped his eyes. "Until I found you too." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Julian turned completely to her now, facing her directly. "With you, I started to feel again," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I started to feel that I matter, not for the money, not for what I can offer, but for who I am." He pointed to the room where Maya was sleeping. "That little girl hugs me because she likes me, not because I bought her balloons, but because she really likes me." He looked back at Elena. "And you talk to me for real. No pretense, no masks, just truth." Elena felt her eyes burn. "Julian." "I know it must seem strange," he interrupted. "A rich man saying he feels lonely. People usually think money solves everything, but it doesn't." He shook his head. "Money buys comfort. It buys things, but it doesn't buy true affection. It doesn't buy real companionship. It doesn't buy a home." Eleanor reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. Julian squeezed her hand back. "I know. And that's why I keep coming back. That's why I can't stay away. Because here I feel at home." They stayed like that for a moment, hands intertwined, a comfortable silence between them. Then Julian broke the silence again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Maya's father." He hesitated. "You've been raising her alone since she was a baby, but you've never talked about him." Elena let go of Julian's hand and leaned back on the sofa. She knew this conversation would come eventually, and maybe it was time to talk about it. She was quiet for a long moment, and Julian didn't press. He just waited. Finally, she spoke. "I was 19 when I met him," she began, her voice low. "I was working at a grocery store, and he showed up one day, handsome, Charming. I knew how to say the right things. She smiled, Bassem, but it was a bitter smile. I fell in love fast. Too fast. And he seemed to like me too. At least, that's what I thought. Julian listened in silence. We dated for a few months. It wasn't anything serious for him, I guess, but for me it was everything. It was the first time someone had paid attention to me like that. She took a deep breath. And then I found out I was pregnant. Eleanor paused, and Julian saw the pain in her eyes. I was terrified, but also hopeful. You know, I thought we would start a family, that he would stay, that we would figure it out together. She laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. When I told him, he was silent. That heavy silence, you know it's not good. And then he said he wasn't ready, that he didn't want a child, that it was too soon. Her voice trembled a little. I tried to talk to him, tried to say we could make it work, but he had already made up his mind. Elena quickly wiped her eyes. 2 days later, he was gone. Moved to another city, changed his number, disappeared, as if the baby and I had never existed. Julian felt anger tighten in his chest, anger for a man he had never met, anger for someone who had abandoned Elena and Maya. And I was left alone, Elena continued, pregnant, with no family, no support, nothing. She looked at the bedroom door where Maya was sleeping. I thought about giving up. I thought I wouldn't make it. But then she was born. A genuine smile appeared on her face. And when I looked into those bright little eyes, I knew I would find a way. No matter how hard it was, I would raise her. I would give her everything. I would be both mother and father. Elena looked at Julian. She doesn't remember him. And I barely do. Over time, the anger faded, and I realized it's not worth holding a grudge. He lost the chance to know this amazing little girl. She took a deep breath. But everything he left me is sleeping in there, and she is perfect. Even coming from something that hurt so much, she is perfect. Julian was quiet for a long moment, processing everything, feeling her pain, admiring her strength. Then he spoke, his voice low and respectful. Thank you for telling me. Eleanor looked at him, surprised. Why? Because I know it wasn't easy, and because I respect it. I respect what you went through, what you faced, and I won't judge, I won't question. I won't try to fix anything. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. You're different, she said softly. How so? Most people, when they find out I raised my daughter alone because her father abandoned us, they look at you differently, with pity or with judgment, as if it were my fault for choosing wrong. She looked into his eyes. But you just listened without judging. Julian took her hand again. It's not about filling anyone's shoes, he said. It's about being here now. It's about moving forward, even while carrying the past. Eleanor nodded. I understand, more than you know. And he did understand, because he also knew what it was like to move forward while missing someone. Missing his mother, missing someone who truly cared. They sat there, hands intertwined, sharing the weight of each other's losses. They didn't need to say anything more. They didn't need to explain, because they both understood. They understood what it was to lose someone, whether through death or abandonment. They understood what it was to feel alone. And they understood what it was to finally find someone who saw the pain and didn't try to fix it, just stayed there. Present. After a long silence, Julian finally spoke. I think we have more in common than I thought. Eleanor smiled through her tears. I think so too. We're kind of broken, aren't we? Very broken, she agreed, laughing softly. But maybe, Julian hesitated, maybe we can help each other pick up the pieces. Elena looked at him, at the man who had everything but had nothing, at the man who had found a home in a small, simple apartment, at the man who had looked at her and seen a person, not a cleaner, at the man who didn't judge when he learned the truth. Maybe, she said softly. And in that moment, sitting on the worn-out sofa, hands intertwined, sharing pains and voids, They began to understand something important. Sometimes, the most broken people are the ones who fit together best, because they understand, they respect. They don't try to fix, they just stay. And being there, present, was all they both needed. The morning was cold when Julian entered the office building downtown. He had a meeting scheduled at 9 with investors on the 12th floor. It was an important meeting, the kind that could yield millions if everything went well. He adjusted his tie as he walked through the revolving doors and into the lobby. The place was spacious, with a gleaming marble floor and floor-to-ceiling glass walls. Very modern, very corporate, very cold. And it was there, in the middle of that huge lobby, that he saw her. Eleanor. She had her back to him, standing on a small stepladder, cleaning the high windows with a cloth and a spray bottle. She wore a simple blue uniform, her blonde hair tied in a low bun. She stretched to reach the top corner of the glass, wiping the cloth in circular motions. Julian stopped in the middle of the lobby, just watching. He had never seen her at work. He had never thought about what it was like. But there she was, doing what she did every day. Invisible to everyone who rushed past in the lobby, executives in suits, secretaries in high heels, everyone passing her as if she were part of the wall. A man in a grey suit bumped into her as he passed, not even apologizing. Elena held onto the ladder, swayed a little, but managed to regain her balance. She continued cleaning as if nothing had happened. As if it were normal. Julian felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of anger and sadness. He walked toward her slowly, his steps echoing on the marble. When he got close, he stopped beside the ladder and looked up. Elena. She looked down, startled. The cloth almost fell from her hand. When she saw who it was, her bright eyes widened in surprise. Julian? She quickly climbed down the ladder, almost tripping on the last step. What are you doing here? She looked around nervously, as if afraid someone would see them talking. I have a meeting here, he explained, pointing upward. On the 12th floor, you work here? Elena looked down, embarrassed. She wrung the cleaning cloth in her hands. I started a few months ago. I didn't know you came to this building. Julian looked at her, at the simple uniform that seemed too big for her, at her rough, red hands from so much scrubbing, at how small she looked in that huge lobby. You know I see you, right? He said quietly, stepping closer. From the very first day. Eleanor slowly raised her eyes, confused. What do you mean? I see you, Julian repeated, his voice firm but gentle. As a woman, as a person. It doesn't matter what you're doing or where you are. I always see you. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. She had spent years being invisible, years cleaning offices, bathrooms, windows, floors, without anyone even looking at her. People passed her by as if she were part of the furniture. No one asked her name. No one said good morning. No one said thank you. She was invisible. But Julian, he saw her. She began, but couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor. A gruff male voice cut through the moment. She turned quickly, her whole body tensing up. It was the supervisor, a middle-aged man with a potbelly and a grumpy face. He approached with heavy steps. What are you doing standing around talking? He asked, his voice harsh. The windows on the 3rd floor haven't been cleaned yet, and neither has the 5th floor bathroom. Do you think you're being paid to chat? Elena immediately lowered her head. Sorry, sir. I'll get right to it. Julian felt anger rise quickly. He stepped forward, placing himself between Elena and the supervisor. She was talking to me, he said, his voice cold and sharp. I was the one who asked her to stop. Is there a problem? The supervisor looked at Julian, sizing him up. From the expensive clothes, the impeccable suit, the brand-name watch on his wrist, and the confident demeanor, he realized this wasn't someone to be trifled with, probably someone important. Oh, he changed his tone instantly, forcing a fake smile. All right then, sir. No problem. But as soon as you're done talking, Elena, there's a lot of work waiting. Understood, she murmured. The supervisor walked away, muttering something under his breath. Elena looked at Julian, mortified. Her face was red. You didn't have to do that. Now he's going to be watching me. He shouldn't talk to you like that, Julian said, still annoyed. It's his job, Elena defended, tiredly. He's just doing his job. That's no excuse. Nothing justifies treating someone as if they're less. Elena sighed deeply. She knew it was no use arguing. I need to get back, she said, picking up the ladder again. Otherwise, I'll be in real trouble. Julian glanced at his watch. There were still 15 minutes until his meeting. Meet me at the end of your shift, he asked. Elena hesitated. What for? Just meet me, please. Elena looked into his eyes and saw something there, something sincere. I get off at noon, she said finally. I'll wait for you here in the lobby. Elena agreed with a small nod and walked away toward the elevators. Julian stood there watching her go, still feeling that anger burning in his chest. The meeting lasted 3 hours. It was productive. The investors accepted the proposal. Millions were secured. But Julian barely paid attention. His mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Elena, about the way she had lowered her head when the supervisor spoke to her, about how she was invisible to everyone else. When the meeting ended, Julian went down to the lobby and waited. He sat on one of the leather benches near the entrance and just sat there, watching people come and go. At noon sharp, Elena appeared. She had changed out of her uniform into regular clothes, old jeans and a simple blouse. Her hair was still in a ponytail. She looked around until she saw him sitting on the bench. She walked over to him. Hi, she said, a bit awkwardly. Julian stood up immediately. Hi, have you had lunch? Not yet. I usually just eat at home. It's cheaper. Come have lunch with me, he said. Elena blinked, surprised. What? Come have lunch with me. There's a good restaurant nearby. Nothing fancy, just a nice place. Julian, I can't. I need to pick up Maya and... Call your neighbor, Julian interrupted gently. Ask her to stay for another hour. I'll pay for the extra time, please. Elena hesitated, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw only sincerity. Okay, she relented. I'll call. She made the call, explaining the situation. The neighbor agreed without any issues. Done, she said. They walked side by side through the downtown streets. The sun was strong now. After 2 blocks, they arrived at a small restaurant. It was nice, but not overly fancy. It had light wood tables, natural light pouring in through the windows, and a cozy atmosphere. The waiter greeted them and led them to a table by the window. Elena sat down, still feeling a bit uncomfortable. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. I wanted to, Julian replied. They ordered their food. Elena chose the cheapest item on the menu. He didn't insist. He respected her choice. They were silent for a few minutes. I didn't know you worked in that building, Julian said finally. I started 3 months ago. It pays a little better than my old job. Does the supervisor always talk to you like that? Elena shrugged. It's normal. He has a lot of people to supervise. I'm just another employee to him. It shouldn't be normal, Julian insisted. Elena stopped eating and looked at him. You don't understand, Julian. For people like me, we're invisible. People walk past me every day and don't even see me. I clean their tables, the bathrooms they use, the windows they look through. But they don't see me. They don't know my name. I'm just... nothing. She took a deep breath. And that's okay. I've accepted it. That's just a job. It pays the bills. That's what matters. Julian leaned forward. I see you. Elena felt her eyes burn. I know, and it's weird. Good, but weird. Why weird? Because I'm not used to it. I'm not used to someone looking at me and really seeing me as a person, as a woman. She quickly wiped her eyes. Sometimes I forget that I'm more than the job I do, that I'm more than the uniform I wear. You are so much more than that, Julian said firmly. You're a mother. You're strong. You're brave. You're beautiful. You're everything. Elena felt her heart race at his words. Thank you, she whispered. They went back to eating. They talked about small things, about Maya, about the books she was loving. When they finished, Julian paid the bill and they left. The sun was still strong. Thank you for lunch, Elena said. You don't have to thank me. They stood there for a moment. I wanted to invite you to something, Julian said. Elena looked at him, curious. To what? I wanted to take you and Maya out to dinner. To a real restaurant. Nothing too fancy, just a nice place and with good food. Elena hesitated. Julian, please, let me do this. Elena looked at him but hesitated. The fear was there. Aren't you embarrassed to go out with us? She asked quietly. Julian frowned. Embarrassed? Why? Because I'm a cleaner. Because we don't have money. Because I don't know how to act in fancy places. Because we're not from your world. She took a deep breath. Because people will look and they will judge. Julian took a step forward and held her shoulders, gently but firmly. Listen to what I'm about to tell you, he said, each word heavy with truth. I am with the best people I could have by my side. I'm not embarrassed about anything. I'm proud. Proud to be with you, proud to be with Maya. And if anyone looks at us the wrong way, that's their problem, not mine. Elena felt the tears return. You're different from anyone I've ever met, she said. So, do you accept the invitation? Elena wiped her eyes and smiled. We accept. 2 days later, on Saturday night, Julian came to pick up Elena and Maya from the apartment. He had carefully chosen a restaurant, nice but cozy. Maya was thrilled. She had put on the prettiest dress she owned, a simple pink dress. Elena wore black pants and a light-colored blouse. Her blonde hair was loose on her shoulders. Julian arrived at the agreed time, and the three of them walked to the restaurant. It was close, it's about a 20-minute walk. The night was pleasant. Maya skipped between them, holding each of their hands, telling stories about everything she saw on the street. Eleanor and Julian exchanged glances over the little girl's head, smiling. When they arrived at the restaurant, Maya stopped at the door, open-mouthed. The place had yellow lights hanging from the ceiling. Soft music was playing. A delicious smell of Italian food filled the air. Look how beautiful it is, Mommy, Maya said, her bright eyes shining. It's like in the movies. Elena smiled. Seeing her daughter this happy was worth everything. The waiter greeted them and led them to a table by the window. Maya sat on the edge of her chair, looking at everything with curiosity. They ordered their food. Julian helped Maya choose a simple pasta with tomato sauce. Elena ordered something modest, but Julian insisted she order a dessert too. While they waited, they talked. Julian asked Maya questions, and she answered excitedly, gesturing, telling him about the drawings she had made. Elena watched quietly, seeing the way he interacted with her daughter, the way he truly listened, the way he treated Maya as if she were the most important person in the world. The food arrived, and they ate amidst laughter and conversation. It was light. It was enjoyable. It was family. In the middle of dinner, after eating half of her pasta, Maya put down her fork and grew quiet. She looked down at her own fingers, and then lifted her eyes to Julian. Julian? She called softly. Yes, little one? Maya clasped her little hands on the table and took a deep breath. I want to learn how to read and write, she said, her voice full of hope. Julian stopped eating and looked at her. Elena turned red, embarrassed. Maya, you don't need to talk about that now. But Julian raised his hand gently. Let her speak, he said. He leaned forward. Say, why do you want to learn to read and write, Maya? Maya looked at her own fingers, organizing her thoughts. Because when you bring me books, you have to read them to me. And I want to read by myself. I want to know what the stories say without having to wait. She lifted her eyes, and there was so much sincerity there. And I want to know what the street signs say when I walk with Mommy. And I want to write my name. I want to write little notes for Mommy when she's sad. I want to write down the stories I make up in my head. Her voice grew quieter. And I want to go to a real school, with other kids, with a teacher, with a notebook and pencils, with a uniform. With everything the other kids have. Julian felt something stir inside him. Maya continued, looking at her mother with a smile. Mommy said that if things work out, I'll go to school next year. She's saving money every month. She works really hard for it. She always puts a little bit aside whenever there's extra. Eleanor had her head down, picking at her food without eating, her face red. She didn't want Julian to know how hard it was. "I know it will take a while," Maya said, "but that's okay. I can wait. Mommy said it will happen. And I believe her." Julian looked from Maya to Eleanor, and then back to Maya. He saw the hope in the little girl's bright eyes. He saw the simple but immense dream of just learning to read and write, and he also saw Elena's silent shame. The shame of not being able to give that to her daughter immediately. And in that moment, looking at that 4-year-old girl with such simple dreams, just wanting to read and write, things that most children took for granted, and at that mother who fought every day to make those dreams come true, Julian felt something shift inside him, something profound, something that changed everything. He didn't say anything then. He didn't make any promises out loud. He didn't want to embarrass Elena. But something inside him was decided in that very moment. That little girl would learn to read and write. She would have a school, a teacher, a uniform, supplies, a notebook, pencils, everything, and not next year, soon, and he would make sure of it. Somehow, without hurting Elena's pride, without making it seem like charity, he would make sure of it, because now they were no longer just acquaintances. They were part of his life, part of his heart, and he wasn't going to let them keep fighting alone. Not when he could help, not when he had finally found someone worth fighting for. Julian smiled at Maya and said simply, "You're going to be an amazing student, I'm sure of it." And as Maya smiled back and returned to eating her pasta, Julian was already planning how to change everything, how to give them what they deserved, how to build the future Maya dreamed of, and how to make Elena understand that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was love. 2 weeks had passed since the dinner at the restaurant. 2 weeks since Maya had spoken of her dream to learn to read and write. 2 weeks since something had shifted in the air between Elena and Julian. He continued to show up every day. But now, there was something different. Something unsaid, but present. In the glances that lasted a little longer. In the hands that touched by chance and were slow to pull away. In the silences that weren't uncomfortable, but full of meaning. That Friday night, after playing with Maya and reading her stories until she fell asleep, Julian stayed in the living room. Elena came out of her daughter's room and closed the door softly. "She's asleep," Elena said, returning to the living room. Julian was standing by the window, looking down at the street below. He turned when he heard her enter. "Elena," he began, his voice low. "I need to talk to you about something." Elena felt her heart race. There was something in his tone. Something serious, something important. Of course. Should we go to the backyard? "It's quieter out there." They went out the back door. The yard was tiny, but it had 2 old plastic chairs and a low table. The night was calm, with a light breeze that rustled the leaves of the single tree growing there. Elena sat in one chair, and Julian sat in the other, facing her. He was quiet for a moment, as if organizing his words in his head. Eleanor waited, nervously. She didn't know what to expect. Part of her was afraid he was going to say he was leaving, that he had gotten tired, that it had been fun, but now he needed to get back to his life. But then he spoke, and what he said was completely different. "I've always had everything," Julian began, looking at his own hands. "Money, a big house, expensive cars, trips all over the world, everything money could buy." He took a deep breath. "But I never did anything for anyone but myself. I always lived for myself, for my work, for my business. I always thought that was enough, that being successful was what mattered, that accumulating more and more was the goal." Elena listened in silence, not interrupting. "And women," he continued, lifting his eyes to her now. "I've had beautiful women around me, truly beautiful. Models, actresses, successful businesswomen, women any man would want by his side." He paused. "But they were empty, self-serving, superficial. They wanted the money. They wanted the status. They wanted to be seen with me at events. But they didn't want me. Not really. They never asked how I was. They never cared if I'd had a tough day. They never looked at me and saw the person. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. And I accepted it, Julian confessed. I accepted it because I thought that was all I deserved. I thought that's how it worked. You give money, they give companionship, a cold exchange, no love, no truth. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, looking directly into her bright eyes. But then I found you, and everything changed. Eleanor felt her breath catch. Being with you two made me see a different world, Julian continued, his voice full of emotion. A world where what matters isn't how much you have, but how much you care, how much you give, how much you love. He reached out and took her hand. You are everything I've ever looked for. You are real. You are true. You are strong. You are beautiful, not just on the outside, but on the inside. For the way you love your daughter, for the way you fight every day, for the way you never give up. Eleanor felt her eyes fill with tears. And I fell in love with you, Julian said, and every word came from the bottom of his heart. I fell in love with the woman who cleans windows in the morning and comes home to bake a chocolate cake in the afternoon. I fell in love with the mother who does everything alone but never complains. I fell in love with the person who made me feel at home for the first time in years. He squeezed her hand. I want to be more than a friend, he said, his voice firm yet vulnerable. If you'll let me. I want to take care of you from now on. Not as charity, not as an obligation, but because I love you, and I love Maya. And I want to build something real with you. Elena was crying now, tears streaming freely down her face. She didn't take her eyes off him. Julian continued, because he needed to say it all. He needed her to know. I want to make your daughter's dream come true, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I want to secure her future. I want her to learn to read and write. I want her to go to school. I want her to have everything she deserves. And I want to do this not because I have money, but because I care. Because she matters. Because you matter. He took a deep breath. And I want to help you too. I want to get you out of that building where you're invisible. I want to put you in a place where you're seen, where you're respected, where you're valued. Not because I think you're not capable, but because you deserve better. You deserve so much more than what life has given you so far. He stopped, waiting for her to say something, waiting for her to accept or reject, waiting. Elena wiped her eyes with her free hand. She looked at him, at the man who had entered her life without warning. The man who had bought balloons for her daughter, the man who had stayed, who had come back, who had cared, and she smiled, a smile wet with tears, but genuine. You didn't come to save me, she said, her voice low but firm. You stayed, and that is worth everything. Julian felt his chest tighten at those words. I don't need a savior, Elena continued, the words coming out slowly, heavy with truth. I've saved myself so many times. I've gotten up on my own so many times. I've moved forward alone so many times. She squeezed his hand back. But you didn't try to save me. You didn't come with pity. You didn't come trying to fix things. You just stayed. You saw the mess of my life and you stayed. You saw my exhaustion and you stayed. You saw I had nothing to offer and still, you stayed. She took a deep breath, tears still falling. And that is worth more than anything. It's worth more than money. It's worth more than promises. It's worth more than pretty words, because you proved it. You proved that you care. You proved that we matter. Julian felt his own eyes burn. I'm scared, Elena confessed, her voice trembling. Scared to accept and have you change your mind. Scared that we'll get used to it and you'll leave. Scared to let Maya get even more attached and have you disappear. Because she already loves you, Julian. She already sees you as something more. I'm not leaving, Julian said firmly, looking directly into her eyes. I'm here, and I'm going to stay here, not as someone who's just passing through, but as someone who wants to stay forever. Eleanor sobbed. Are you sure? Because if you have any doubt, any hesitation, you'd better leave now, before I completely believe you. before I let my heart open up completely, before... Julian got up from his chair and knelt in front of her. He held her face in both hands, gentle but firm. "I'm sure," he said, looking deep into her bright eyes. "Absolutely sure. I love you. I love Maya. And I want to stay. Not just today. Not just tomorrow. But forever." Eleanor closed her eyes, tears streaming from beneath her eyelids. She placed her hands over his, feeling the warmth, the firmness, the truth. "I love you too," she whispered, finally saying out loud what she had known for days. "I'm scared, but I love you." Julian smiled and rested his forehead against hers. "Then let me," he pleaded softly. "Let me stay. Let me take care of you. Let me be a part of this. Let me build something real with you." Elena opened her eyes and looked at him, at the man kneeling in front of her, at the man who had everything but chose them, at the man who saw her. "Okay," she said, smiling through her tears. "You can stay." Julian pulled her into a hug. A tight hug, the kind that says everything without needing words. Eleanor let herself be hugged, feeling the weight of the last few years being lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone. They had someone. They stayed like that for a long time, embracing in the small yard under the starry sky with the breeze rustling the leaves of the tree. And when they finally pulled apart, Julian took her hand again. "So, about what I said," he began, returning to the subject. "About helping with Maya, with your job, do you accept?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I accept, but on one condition." "What is it?" "You let me pay you back, not all at once, not now, but one day, when I can." "You let me repay you somehow." Julian shook his head. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Elena interrupted firmly. "For me, for my pride, so I know it's not charity, that it's a partnership." Julian thought for a moment and then nodded. "Okay, your way, in your own time." Elena smiled. Thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do, for everything. For staying, for caring, for seeing me." Julian kissed her hand. "Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me, for giving me a family." Elena felt her heart warm. They sat there longer, talking about the next steps. Julian spoke about the schools he had researched, about the contacts he had in companies, about how he would take care of everything, but respect her pace. Eleanor talked about her fears, about her hopes, about how she wanted Maya to have everything she never had, about how she was tired of being invisible, and together they began to plan Maya's enrollment in a good school, to plan Elena's change of job, to plan the future that, for the first time, seemed possible. When it was well past midnight, Julian finally got up to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said at the door. "I know," Elena replied, smiling. He pulled her in for another hug, a long, tight hug full of promises. "I love you," he whispered in her ear. "I love you too," she whispered back. Julian left, and Elena stood at the door watching him go down the stairs and disappear into the night. She closed the door slowly and leaned against it, closing her eyes. Everything had changed. The dinner hadn't just been a gesture. It had been the beginning of something real, the beginning of something true. And that conversation in the yard, that had been the moment when love stopped being just a feeling and became action. It became commitment. It became a path. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at the living room, at the scattered toys, at the books on the table, at the life that had been just hers and Maya's, but that now had someone else. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor wasn't afraid of the future. She had hope. Hope that things could be different, that love could be real, that she deserved to be happy, and that maybe, finally, she had found someone who would stay, not to save her, but to love her. And that changed everything. 3 days had passed since the conversation in the yard. 3 days since Julian and Eleanor had put everything into words. 3 days since love had ceased to be silent and had become declared. That Sunday afternoon, Julian arrived at the apartment with a bag of fresh fruit and a tub of ice cream. Maya opened the door before he even knocked, as if she had been waiting at the window. "Julian!" she shouted, throwing herself at his legs. He almost dropped the bag but managed to keep his balance, laughing. "Hi, little one. Did you miss me?" "I did. You took so long." "Took so long. I was here yesterday," he said, coming in and closing the door with his foot. "But it feels like a long time," Maya complained, pouting. Eleanor appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. She smiled when she saw Julian. "Hi," she said, and there was something different in the way she looked at him now. Something softer, more open. "Hi," he replied, and his smile was the same. Maya pulled Julian by the hand to the sofa. "Come on. I want to show you the drawing I made today." She ran to the coffee table and picked up a sheet of paper covered in crayon. It was a drawing of 3 people, one tall, one medium, and one small, holding hands in front of a house. There was a huge yellow sun in the corner and flowers scattered across the ground. 7 go. "Look," Maya showed him proudly. "It's the 3 of us." Julian took the drawing carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He looked at every detail, at the blonde hair she had drawn on herself and her mother, at his dark hair, at the big smiles on all their faces. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice emotional. "You draw very well." "I know," Maya said, without modesty. "Mommy says I have talent." Elena laughed from the kitchen. Such a humble girl. Julian sat on the sofa and Maya sat next to him, resting her head on his arm as had become her custom. "You know what I was thinking?" Maya said, looking up at him. "What?" "That my birthday wish came true." Julian frowned, confused. "Your birthday wish?" "Yeah," Maya nodded seriously. "Remember when you brought the balloons and we sang Happy Birthday?" "I remember, and I closed my eyes and made a wish before blowing out the candles." "I remember that," Maya smiled, a huge, genuine smile. "Well, my wish came true." Julian felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know why, but those words carried weight. "And what did you wish for?" he asked quietly. Maya looked at him with those clear, innocent eyes. She didn't hesitate. She just said it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I wished for a dad." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian was completely still. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He just looked at the small girl sitting beside him, with her innocent smile and her eyes shining with happiness. Elena appeared in the living room doorway, still holding the dish towel. She had heard, and she stood frozen too, her eyes wide. "I always saw the other kids with their dads," Maya continued, unaware of the impact of her words. "At the park, at the store. They would hold hands with their mom and dad, and I only had mommy. And that's okay because mommy is the best in the world." She looked at her mother and smiled. Elena felt her eyes fill with tears. Maya looked back at Julian. "But I always wanted a dad too. Someone to play with me, to read stories, to hug me, to stay with us." She held his large hand with her 2 small ones, "And then you showed up, on my birthday, with the balloons, and you stayed. You came back the next day, and the next, and the next, and you didn't leave." Her voice became quieter, more emotional, even for a child. "And now you're always here, and you play with me, and you read stories, and you hug me. And you take care of mommy too, and you're like a dad." She squeezed his hand. "So my wish came true. I have a dad now. I have you." Julian felt something break inside him, something he had held in for years, something he didn't even know was there until that moment. He felt his eyes burn. He felt his throat close up. He felt his chest tighten so much he could barely breathe. And then, for the first time in many years, Julian began to cry. It wasn't a silent cry. It was a deep sob, coming from within, that shook his shoulders. Tears streamed down his face uncontrollably. Maya's eyes widened, scared. "Julian," she called out, worried. "Guys, why are you crying?" She looked at her mother, as if asking for help. Eleanor was already crying too, but she came over and sat on Maya's other side. "Julian," Maya repeated, her little voice worried. "Did I say something wrong? Are you sad?" Julian shook his head, trying to control himself, but the tears kept falling. He wiped his face with his hands, but it was no use. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice choked and trembling. "No, little one," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm not sad. I'm happy. Very happy." Maya let herself be hugged, but she was still confused. "But why are you crying if you're happy?" "Because sometimes," Julian tried to explain between sobs, "sometimes we get so happy that our heart can't hold it all inside, and so it comes out as tears." He pulled back a little to look at her, holding her small face in both hands. "You have no idea how much those words mean to me," he said, his voice breaking. "How much you mean to me?" Maya smiled, still a little confused, but happy to see he wasn't sad. "I love you," Julian said, looking deep into her bright eyes. "I love you so much. You and your mum are the most important people in my life." "I love you too," Maya said simply and truly, in the way only children can love. Julian pulled her into another hug, and this time he didn't hold back. He cried on that little 4-year-old's shoulder, cried out years of loneliness, cried out years of emptiness, cried out all the love he had never had the chance to give. Elena came closer and hugged them both, crying too, crying. The three of them stayed there, embracing on the worn-out sofa of that small apartment, as the afternoon sun streamed through the window. After a long moment, Julian pulled away and wiped his face. He looked at Maya, who was looking at him with that serious expression she sometimes had. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "You can," Maya replied. "You made my dream come true too." Maya tilted her head to the side, curious. "Your dream?" "Yeah, I made a wish too. It wasn't on my birthday, but it was a wish I made many times." "What wish?" Julian glanced quickly at Elena, and she smiled through her tears encouragingly. He looked back at Maya. "I wished for a family, a real family. Not just a family in name, but a family of love, a family where people care, where people stay." He took her hand again. "And you and your mom, you are that family. You gave me something I never had. You gave me a home." Maya smiled, that huge smile that lit up her whole face. "So we made each other's dream come true," she said, as if it were the most incredible discovery in the world. "We did," Julian agreed, laughing through his tears. "We did." Maya threw herself into his arms again, and he held her tight, as if he would never let go. Elena watched, her heart so full it felt like it would explode. She had never imagined it would be like this, that love could arrive this way, that one person could walk into their lives and change everything. But Julian had changed. He had changed everything. And now seeing him hug her daughter, seeing him cry with happiness, seeing him love Maya as if she had been his from the very beginning, Elena knew with absolute certainty that he wasn't going anywhere. He had stayed, not as a visitor, not as a friend, but as family, as a father, as love. And that, Elena thought, that was everything they had ever needed. They didn't need wealth. They didn't need luxury. They needed someone who would stay, someone who would love, someone who would see them for what they truly were, valuable, important, worthy of love. And Julian was that someone. He had been since the first day, when he bought all the balloons at the stall just to see a little girl smile. And now, months later, he still was. Only now he wasn't a kind stranger anymore. He was family, he was a father, he was love. And that changed everything. 2 weeks had passed since that afternoon when Maya had talked about her birthday wish. 2 weeks since Julian had cried in the arms of that little girl, feeling for the first time the weight and beauty of being called a father. In those 2 weeks, Julian spent almost every day at the apartment. He would arrive in the late afternoon and stay until Maya fell asleep. Sometimes he stayed even later, talking with Elena, but every night he would leave. He would go back to his house, that big, empty, cold house. And every night and when he left, something inside him ached. That Friday night, after putting Maya to bed, Julian and Elena were sitting on the sofa. He was quieter than usual. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Julian looked at her. He took a deep breath. "Every night, when I leave here, I hate it," he said. "I hate having to go. I hate going back to that empty house." Elena sat quietly, listening. This little apartment, This is my home. Here, with you. He took her hands. I don't want to see you go at the end of the day anymore, he said firmly. If you'll have me, come live with me. Elena's eyes widened. Come live with me, Julian repeated. You and Maya. Let's build a life together, a real family, every day, forever. Elena was speechless. I love you. I love Maya, and I don't want to live apart from you anymore. Elena felt tears well up. She looked around at the small apartment that had been their home. It had been all she could give her daughter, but Maya deserved more. Elena looked back at Julian. If it's to build it together, she said. We'll go. Julian smiled, pulling her into a tight hug. The next morning, they told Maya. She was having breakfast when Julian arrived. Elena took a deep breath. Sweetie, Julian made a proposal. He asked if we want to go live with him, in his house, to be a real family. Maya's eyes widened. Can I live with Julian? Yes, Elena confirmed. You would have your own room, and we would wake up together every day. Maya looked from Elena to Julian. Then she smiled. I want to. We're going to be a real family. She threw herself into Julian's arms. He held her tight in a hug, his heart bursting with happiness. The move happened the following week. There wasn't much to take. Clothes, toys, the books Julian had given them, the drawings stuck to the fridge. Eleanor made sure to take the small table where Maya drew and the pot she used to make chocolate cake, things that had history. When they arrived at Julian's house, Maya stopped at the entrance, dumbfounded. The house was big, with a yard, huge windows, 2 floors. Is this it? Maya asked. This is it, Julian confirmed. Welcome home. He guided them inside. He went up the stairs and opened the door to the first bedroom. This is Maya's room. Maya ran in. The room was large, with a new bed, a wardrobe, and a desk. Is it mine? Maya asked in disbelief. All yours. Maya ran from one side to the other, laughing, jumping on the bed. Elena stood at the door, crying. She had never been able to give this to her daughter. Julian took her hand. And our room is over there, he said. Elena looked at him. Our room, if you want. I want to be with you. In our room. Julian smiled and pulled her into a hug. The first few days were about adjusting. Maya explored every corner. She ran through the yard, she played on the stairs, she drew at her new desk. Eleanor learned to cook in the large kitchen. She started to make that house feel like a home, and Julian woke up every day and smiled. He was no longer alone. He would come downstairs for breakfast and find Maya sitting at the table. He would find Elena in the kitchen, humming, and that was all he had ever wanted. A week after the move, Julian came home from work and found a new drawing stuck to the fridge. 3 people holding hands in front of a big house. And underneath, written in red crayon in crooked letters, "This is the house my heart chose." Julian stood there, looking at the drawing, his eyes burning. Eleanor appeared behind him and hugged him. "She made it today," Eleanor said. "She said it's not just a house, it's the house of her heart." Julian turned and hugged Eleanor tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting me." "Thank you," Elena replied, "for giving us a home." They stood there, embracing as the smell of food filled the house, as Maya played in the living room, scattering her toys. As life happened, Julian looked around. The house that had been empty now had life. It smelled of fresh coffee in the morning. It had toys scattered about. It had laughter echoing. It had drawings on the fridge. It had family. It had love. It had a home. And it had all started so simply, with a $3 balloon, with the desire to make a little girl smile. Sometimes, it all starts with something small and ends with what money can't buy, a true home. Julian looked at the woman in his arms, at the girl playing in the living room, and knew for sure that he had found it. It wasn't in success, it wasn't in money, it was right there, in that moment, with those people, in love, in family, in a home. Finally, he had found his place. It wasn't the big house that made the home. It was the people inside it. And those people were his people, his family, his love, his home, forever. That night, when they tucked Maya into bed, she held both of their hands. "Good night, Mommy. Good night, Daddy." It was the first time she had called Julian Daddy so naturally. Julian kissed her forehead. "Good night, my little one." Elena and Julian left the room and closed the door softly. In the hallway, they looked at each other. They didn't need to say anything. They went down to the living room and sat on the sofa, holding hands. "We did it," Elena said. "We built a family." "We did," Julian agreed. "And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever done." They sat there in silence, enjoying that moment, that peace, that completeness. Through the window, the moon illuminated the garden, and inside the house everything was where it was supposed to be. A house that was once empty now had life. It had color, it had noise, it had love, and three people who were once alone were now a family, a real family, built not with blood but with choice, with presence, with love. Julian looked at Eleanor, and she looked at him, and without saying a word they both understood. They had found their home, not in a place, but in each other. Sometimes it all starts with a $3 balloon and ends with what money can't buy, a true home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.